Well, this is Adam Goldberg, co-founder and chief innovation officer at Clear Sailing, here to present another in our video blog series. Today we're going to discuss a blog that has recently been published that we call The Tale of Two Keywords. The Tale of Two Keywords really talks about two keywords exactly the same, where we kind of have a little play that they were separated at birth and they each ended up in different companies' campaigns. And one company followed the rules of last click, attribution, while the other company actually employed an attribution management strategy that gave credit beyond the last click. And we talked about the changes that these keywords have gone about and valuation and the importance that one felt how important the keyword was to their campaign, where the other company that used last click didn't seem to see all the value and therefore didn't set this keyword at certain bid prices. And you can read all about that, and we applied some metrics and some charts in that blog to explain what differences come about with the different attribution lenses one might use. But at the end of where I'm going to focus today, we talked about a process a company could go through to see if they could get some value out of getting beyond that last click without making a major investment in a technology that allows you to do attribution and see last click and view throughs. So today I just want to talk about that process that we've talked about, something that you could test out and determine if you could benefit in a great way from the use of getting beyond that last click measurement. So the way it works, first off, let's determine if you even have an attribution issue. And the simplest way to do that is to use your web analytics product. If you're not using one, Google Analytics is free, so there's no reason not to be using one. And that's to look at the average visits per conversion. If it takes your average customer more than one visit to your site to convert, and you're currently using a last click model, then you're giving all the credit to the last visit, whatever got them there, and paying no attention to the very first visit, or what we would call the introducer, the first step of their path. So that could shed some light that, hey, wait a second, maybe I could benefit here if my average visitor takes more than one step, but I'm only looking at the last. Applying some attribution might allow me to see beyond that. Now, the second thing that I'd like to do in this process is to bucket your keywords into three buckets that we use that are simply, you have your introducers, your influencers, and your closers. An introducer, you're going to have to make some educated guesses here for the classification, but an introducer is effectively your general terms, top of the funnel type keywords. A closer are keywords that are like model numbers or your brand terms, your company name and misspellings of those. And then by default, anything in between we would classify in that influencer bucket. Now, once you go ahead and you do that, I want you to count each one. Count the number of introducers, influencers, and closers you have. And if my suspicion is correct, you're likely to have a lot more closers because you've been using last click and that's all you can justify, and very few introducers and influencers that are still active in your campaign. Now, once you do that, I want you to repeat the process, but I also want you now this time to include the pause keywords that you have. Any keyword that you've tried at one point in time but chose to turn off or pause, do the same type of categorization, count up the number of introducers, influencers, and closers you have, and now I would guess that you'll find that you have a lot more introducers and influencers in the pause status than you did in the active status. Now, once you do that, the next step, step 5, is to run a report over the last 12 months, assuming you've been advertising for at least that long, broken out by month, and look at the conversion rate and the number of closes and the amount of revenue tied to each keyword. These are all things that you can get from any search engine you work on with their conversion tracking code. Now, once you do that, I want you to then find a set of introducers and influencers that are currently paused, and I want you to turn those back on. Now, you're going to have to find a decent sample size here. You don't need to turn on thousands or even hundreds, but the core introducers or influencers that are maybe paused that really describe your business. For example, if you're selling baby furniture and you're no longer advertising the word baby furniture, this would be the type of a keyword that I'd like to have you retest, as we're going to measure it slightly differently in the next coming steps. Now, once you've chosen a certain number of keywords to reintroduce and turn back on, what we now need to do is measure their impact. And we're going to measure that impact two ways. One, simply on last click, how many new conversions did I get out as a result of those? Just because a keyword typically performs as an introducer or influencer does not mean that it will never be a closer, so we should get some lift that way. But more importantly, what I want to measure is the lift of your typical closing term. So now that we have that baseline report, and we can look at, say, February and see, okay, my closers closed 110 deals. Now, when I turn back on some introducers or influencers, I've closed 150. Perhaps the reason for that is the introducers and influencers that didn't close new deals, they help my closers to close more, kind of performing like a point guard might on a basketball court. Now, one thing that you might notice when you do this is that my overall conversion rates drop. That could be a sign for alarm, but it really shouldn't be. We'll talk about why. And your cost per acquisition might have increased. And here's why those two things might occur, because we're now including terms that are introducers and influencers that aren't closing. Your overall conversion rate will look like it's falling, but that's not such a bad thing. We'll talk about why in just a second. And your cost per acquisition might look like it's increasing because we're now including more keywords than under last click where you can't easily justify. But the reason why we advertise, the reason why we're in business is to grow revenue, which should grow profit. And the one thing that we should really be focused on as we turn on the introducers and influencers are we getting a nice lift in the revenue that we're driving? And if so, can that revenue lift justify the added cost of the advertising? And if so, we now could say, wait a second, the way I've been doing things by only focusing on closers has likely stymied the growth that I could have by including some introducers and influencers at the top of the funnel. If you start to see these patterns forming, that when you reintroduce these terms, your revenue is growing, then it should encourage you to test more of those. And eventually, what you might want to do then is invest in a technology that allows you to get beyond this type of a test here, which is somewhat rudimentary, and actually conclusively prove it with analytics. To read more, please refer to the link in the posting that we have above this video blog. You can read the full blog in its entirety. And as always, if you have questions, feel free to contact me. Again, I'm Adam Goldberg, co-founder, Chief Innovation Officer, Clear Sailing. Thank you.